Hello and welcome into BTN's Take 10 podcast. This is Alex Roux, BTN. We're back with another two-part episode here on the Take 10 podcast. Last week we had just a guest because our stat head, aka researcher, stats guru, Harold Shelton, was on vacation, but he's back in the lab this week to talk Big Ten basketball. So we sat down with him in the second part of the show for an in-depth breakdown of what's going on in Hoopsland. So get to that in a little bit after our interview with our special guest this week, and that is with co-founder of the Premier Lacrosse League, Paul Rabil. And for any lacrosse fans out there, Paul is obviously a household name in the sport. He's one of the all-time great players in the sport, and his Premier Lacrosse League that he has marketed brilliantly is about to start its second season coming up this spring. So it's good timing because the Big Ten lacrosse season actually gets started next week. Next week has been named Big Ten Lacrosse Week by the conference, and we're able to get Paul on, one of the titans in the sport, to discuss not only his league but how his alma mater, Johns Hopkins, has blended in and elevated the level of Big Ten lacrosse. So really a cool and pretty unique discussion for this podcast. Don't have a whole lot of lacrosse guests on. I think he's the first one. So we'll definitely get to that really shortly here. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, before we get to the interview, to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Podbean if you haven't already. And please leave a rating or review for the show if you like it. And you can also find the show on YouTube as well, where we post every episode under the Big Ten Network channel. So with that out of the way, let's toss it over to Paul Rabil, again, co-founder of the Premier Lacrosse League, also a player in the Premier Lacrosse League. So he's got his plate pretty full when he's not doing podcast interviews. So we will let him take the reins from here. It's BTN's interview with Paul Rabil, and it starts right now. I'm very pleased to be joined by a household name in lacrosse. It's Paul Rabil. He played collegiately at Johns Hopkins and is now a co-founder and player in the Premier Lacrosse League. Paul, thanks for coming on. How's it going?
Thanks for having me. It's going well. And when I was playing at Hopkins, it was so long ago, we weren't even a part of the Big Ten Network. So I missed that opportunity, graduated in 2008, but have seen how quickly the conference has become the best in college lacrosse.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was kind of weird at first, as an alum that Hopkins is in the Big Ten, since it was, a few years after you left Hopkins.
Yeah, and I will use this moment to promote Hopkins as the best and most historically winning university in college lacrosse, dating all the way back pre-NCAA era. And so we had always viewed ourselves, and that's backed by a number of championships, like 44 championships, and a number of first-team All-Americans, et cetera. And we had always viewed ourselves as the Notre Dame football of lacrosse, and had kind of leaned into that independence component, and had played all of the major teams across the biggest conferences in lacrosse. So it was unique at first, but then if you peel back the layers of the onion, you look at the opportunity in aligning with a mainstream conference like the Big Ten, the benefits both economically, from a distribution standpoint, from a resources capacity, it then made a ton of sense. So after deliberating for a while, and I was more on the outside of the internal committee, but I've been asked for some opinions, I was all for it.
Yeah, some Maryland Terrapin fans may have just left the chat, but I got
well, those Maryland Terrapins, when I was in school too, were also playing for the ACC. So if you're still on, hang on for a little bit longer. All right, because we're all a part of the migration to the Big Ten.
Exactly. And I got to say, it's kind of weird as one of the guys who shares a lot of the social content when lacrosse season comes around to kind of pull the trigger and tweet from Big Ten Network tagging, JHU men's lacrosse, just because I feel like that audience hasn't been quite built up yet. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to bridge that gap a little, Paul. So appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, of course. And for all of the listeners that you have across other sports and more of the traditionalists to the Big Ten, I would say that the invitation and the acceptance of Johns Hopkins into this conference was one that we're not only really excited about, but also I think bringing a lot of kind of empirical evidence and accolades and championships to the Big Ten on the lacrosse side, and know that the network regularly distributes the games once in season, and hopefully we carry our weight amongst the other members.
For sure, and I'll talk a little bit more about Big Ten lacrosse towards the end, but I did want to touch on your efforts with the Premier Lacrosse League, because you've been kind of referred to as the Jackie Moon of the PLL. You're both a player and owner. You got that dual responsibility going on. So for those who don't know much about lacrosse, can you give us kind of a general overview of what the PLL is, how many teams are involved, and how to watch it?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So slightly different than semi-pro. I do like to soften maybe the edges of potentially a listener or sports fan hearing that an athlete started a league that he or she's playing in. So it has happened before in the action sports side of things. And I think Yammer Yager is an owner and player in an overseas hockey league. But yeah, it's definitely rare. I would say that over the last 20 years, at least, there had been a professional lacrosse league called Major League Lacrosse that saw the opportunity in the late 90s in the relative boom of lacrosse across participation to college and universities propping up teams at the Division I, II, and III level. Yet, fast forward another 10 years in the modern era of social and digital, I think the former league really missed on the opportunity of marketing itself, finding major distribution with network partners and OTTs, and then elevating the players, as we've seen a lot of non-core sports leagues do, from the UFC to World Surf League to a number of action sports leagues that has propped up. So we looked at that opportunity, originally wanted to work with MLL, given kind of the cohort of players that were interested in moving with me, and just met with some resistance. So what we decided to do was launch a league from scratch, and really embracing this modern era of not only what I had mentioned previously, but the new stadiums that have propped up from the latest MLS ownership group's investment there. And so we built a unique model. We launched the PLL in October of 2018. We played our first season this past summer. We cut a deal with NBC, so they're our network partner. They broadcast our games across NBC Sportsnet and NBC main network. So it was the first time lacrosse had been on broadcast television. If you take even college lacrosse, the Final Four and Championship are on ESPN2. So you look at overall ratings in pro sports, the NFL has seen an increase by 5% this season. The NBA even saw a decrease despite the NBA's accelerated growth. And the net of it is trying to reach the masses is coming down to your ability to book broadcast programming windows. And so we were able to do that in year one, and we just announced, in addition to our six, kind of original teams, we were going to expand this year. So we announced that seventh team to start the year in 2020, and among a number of other things, most notably announcing the markets that we're going to be playing in. We'll have 15 game weekends, and in 15 different markets. So we're excited about year two, but it's been a whirlwind. A ton of stuff to roll out when you launch a league from scratch. And if you have other thoughts or questions, you want to take this. Otherwise, I'll hog the entire podcast talking about everything that we're doing.
No, I love when guests get on a roll, and you touched on it, but you guys have done a really good job promoting the league, and I think a lot of it has to do with kind of your willingness to go some non-traditional routes on the marketing side. I heard about PLL and got to know your personality a little bit because you were on Pardon My Take podcast, and went as far as to even let the host kind of name one of your teams. You touched on the new team, the Water Dogs LC. So was there kind of a collective decision from the PLL brain trust or anyone behind the scenes to try and tap and embed yourself within those audiences, or it just kind of happened naturally because of the connections you have?
I think it's a combination of both, but you have to have that willingness and that strategic effort to touch and access new audiences. And so for us in particular, we've seen new mediums and social media in particular, and the other new medium that's really emerged is podcasting, as you had mentioned, and the Pardon My Take guys, Big Cat PFT, Erica Nardini's the CEO of Barstool, she's an advisor in the business, is that there's never been a stickier time or more content, more availability to access new sports leagues or aspire to be an athlete that doesn't play in the NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL than now. And that's because of that change in medium and direct to consumer. So when we launched this league, put it this way, we wouldn't have been able to raise the capital that we did from the investors that we have 10 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago in the linear age of pro and college sports, where the barrier to enter was so high because you'd have to have a network deal. There were only 4 to 5 major networks. There was a barrier to enter because they had limited programming windows on a 24-hour basis, 365. And then you'd have to build a stadium. You'd go the route of traditional team ownerships in specific markets. So even if you were to go that route, it'd be a 5 to 10 year runway to launch. In today's world, because of social media, because of unlimited inventory, the way that national television has evolved, become international, and now we can subscribe to OTTs, whether it's BTN or whether it's Flow Sports or DAZN. We can watch Cristiano Ronaldo play live overseas. We can watch LeBron James play on the West Coast if we live on the East Coast. That used to never exist. So now all of a sudden programming windows are endless, and that provides opportunities for new entrants in the market. So we're very strategic. We want to be non-traditional. We want to bring everyone behind the curtain and what it's like. We call it like the Shark Tank era of people wanting to learn and understand how the business is operating, how the front office is thinking, not just around trades, not just around wins and losses and rationale around gaming or betting. Like, they want to actually figure out how this business is being built. And the more you bring them to that intimate level, the more likely they will become loyal fans and watch the product and attend games and so on. So that was always our vision. And then the differentiator is, because we're true single entity, we don't have a players association. We don't have 32 team owners that we have to lobby to make a vote go through. We can make decisions pretty quickly, and we're benefiting from that.
Sure, and I'm curious, just what are some of the other ways besides the podcast announcement and embedding with some of the main players in sports media today? What are some other ways you've had to get creative? I noticed that you are not tying your teams to certain cities, and you're doing schedule announcements kind of week by week. So what are some other ways you guys have had to branch out?
Yeah, so with every announcement, we're always thinking about reach and how do we get people's eyebrows to raise and be interested around, frankly, an annual announcement routine that every league goes through, whether it's your season schedule, turning on tickets, expansion team, the expansion draft, all that type of stuff. We're constantly trying to think differently. And so that's like step one. Then step two is tapping into existing mediums that have scale, and whether that is, when we announced the league back in October, we did live television with Bloomberg and CNBC and NBC, and then we did player blogs for Players Tribune. We did a video with Uninterrupted. We had a long form article with The Ringer. We did print with Sports Illustrated. So we're constantly tapping into major in sports endemics and then non-endemics, whether it's business in the New York Times and Washington Post, or sports business in Bloomberg and CNBC, as I'd mentioned. So I think when you look at pro sports, it's about the competition on field, which we have the best players in the world, and we say that the competition takes care of itself. That's the easy part. Those guys go out and play, and they know how to play. And then the second part is, if you've got one, you've got to distribute it. So there's nothing worse in any business, sports or unrelated, to where you have a really great product that no one sees. So distribution was critical, and that's why we got our NBC deal, and that's why we really lean into social media and how we're making these announcements and interacting with our players and actually funneling some releases and announcements through our players' accounts. And then the last part that I'll say is to your reference around not attaching our teams to cities, is we took a broader look at team sports leagues versus individual sports leagues. And if you look at NASCAR, PGA Tour, UFC, the advantage that they have is they drop into a market with the best players in the world over the course of a weekend. They provide a wraparound entertainment to the fans. It's a consistent experience and first class experience for the players and the coaches. And then you're able to really bring your network in and innovate, kind of all hands on deck, because you're not having your network partner go to 12 different cities on a Saturday night. They're focused on that city and that weekend. So we felt like that tour-based model of individual sports has evolved and actually positioned itself with new media and technology to be advantageous. So we wanted to lean into that. And then secondarily, if you're a nascent stage sports league, and in our case in year one we had 6 teams, if we tied our 6 teams to 6 markets, we'd have actually been a really exclusive league, right? Only those 6 markets could feel ownership in the pro sports league that we created. And while lacrosse has become national and participatory growth has seen a major spike out west, we wanted to be able to turn on a pro league that was national overnight. So by not tying to geos, lacrosse fans all over the country, and we've seen this now backed by data internationally, are picking their favorite team based on the players or the team culture or even the coaches, and they don't have to worry about not living in New York or Boston or LA. And so that's how we launched. That doesn't mean we'll always be this way, but we certainly saw a fast ramp up based on that bet.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of with the NBC tie-in, what they've done a great job of doing in the U.S. is kind of capturing fan bases when it comes to people who don't really, necessarily care about Manchester, England. But I've seen a willingness among, my peers to attach themselves to a Premier League soccer team, regardless of geographic affiliation. So, like you said, it's an awesome strategy, and I think there's more of a willingness than people here realize to kind of latch on to teams like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a couple of trends that you look at, and we pull them from Nielsen and Google. And if you look at the millennial sports fan or the Gen Z sports fan, they're actually being coined the fluid fan right now. For a couple of reasons. One, they grew up on social media, so they're native to social. And the shift in attention to sports and the conversation around sports being primarily around athletes. If you look at the modern NBA era in free agency, no longer do we have the Michael Jordans or Magic Johnsons or Larry Birds that are drafted to a team and stay there. Those athletes are moving around sometimes year to year, and those athletes also build a favorable relationship to fans, and what Facebook and Google say is on a 4 times greater basis than fans do with their teams. You match that with what we've seen from millennials, and ostensibly will be the case for Gen Zs, but different than our parents and our parents' parents or Gen Xers, baby boomers. Like, we grow up in a market, and then we have a propensity to move or take new jobs, and we're more geographically agnostic, almost like the free agency market in the NBA. So between those two, and then new medias, fans are less sticky to their favorite team per market than they were in the past. So that's important to reference. And then you had also called on, look, if you can create an entertaining property and you have the best in class players, whether it's the EPL or the PLL, and you can distribute that, fans are going to watch in the U.S. Frankly, it's the number 1 watched soccer program in the U.S. And number 2 is actually La Liga. And then 3 is Bundesliga. And then 4 is MLS in North America alone, because people want to watch the best players in the world. And then they figure out who their favorite club is, whether it's Chelsea or Man United or City, based on their favorite players. So that type of shift in how sports are being consumed is happening right now, and we're jumping on that. All that said, I'm not suggesting that fandom to sports based on where you grew up or geography doesn't matter anymore. I mean, look at the NFL, look at the NBA, look at the NHL playoffs. It certainly matters, and it's really important, but it's just no longer the end-all, be-all like it used to be if you were to start a league in the 80s or 90s.
So you've got all this stuff on your plate. You're trying to get a league off the ground. How much are you still focusing on the professional athlete side of things, staying in shape and being, ready to play? Because on top of all that, you got games to play.
Yeah. So look, this is how I kind of view it is, I'm a single entrepreneur who's heavily focused on my, kind of a dual full-time role as an athlete and as the co-founder of this business. So I'm basically married to my training. It's a part of my day, as is a relationship would be to any co-founder of a business. And I carve out the required time to continue to grow as an athlete, my skill as a player. And then, my business hours during the day are dedicated to the PLL. So what does that cut out? My social life as a single kind of, mid-30s executive, sure. That's not going to be the case forever, but, it's time management and then figuring out what's most important for me in the near term. The good news is we stood up a league and we're successful in doing that in year one. We've operationalized the business. We've brought in a bunch of revenue, and now we're really building out the pipes moving forward to create something that's perennial. And that's basically how I ration it.
All right, I want to talk a little bit of Big Ten.
Does that sound too robotic to you?
No. You blend the Silicon Valley tech guy with the athlete very well. The lines blur perfectly. All right, I want to talk a little bit more about Big Ten college lacrosse before we wrap up. Paul, you've been very generous with your time. It's good timing because Big Ten Lacrosse Week actually starts next week. So now that the Big Ten, we talked about, has Maryland, has Hopkins, Ohio State's been pretty good. How is it viewed in the lacrosse universe, and how does it kind of stack up with some of the other powerhouse leagues and schools?
Well, in the lacrosse universe, it was the fastest rise to the top. And granted, I'm partial given my relationship with Johns Hopkins and growing up in the state of Maryland. But if you just look at win-losses, if you look at tournament appearances and success up to this point, All-Americans, it was previously the ACC. I think the ACC has quickly been overcome by the Big Ten. And Maryland played a significant role in that. Obviously, Johns Hopkins and the history of Johns Hopkins. But what we've seen with Penn State, even over the last couple of years, they were the favorite to win last year, and I think are the favorite this year to win the NCAA championship. And you mentioned Ohio State, is the conference is actually pretty deep too. So I think it's some of the most exciting ball. Every team has a different style. So I think different than, call it Big Ten basketball versus ACC basketball. There's two different styles that you can really peg. In lacrosse, we have a high-paced, high-scoring team in Penn State as part of the Big Ten, and then also a more methodical, stringent defense, kind of more slow-pace and tactical offense in Maryland. Both of those teams make the Final Four seemingly every year, so you get a good mix of fluidity. So if you're new to lacrosse and you're watching it, I would check out, every team has a different style, and that's, I think you'll find your fan favorite, so to speak, within the Big Ten.
Well, you compared it to basketball briefly there, and I assume you've been following, at least from afar, what Pat Spencer's doing for Northwestern.
Yeah.
It's wild. I mean, the fact that he's able to be a dominant player in lacrosse and come in and more than hold his own in a Big Ten, another Big Ten sport is crazy. So, what do you think that says, I guess, about the dual sport nature maybe of some lacrosse players? Because, you see guys like Chris Hogan making the NFL, and it's kind of a trend that I at least have noticed from afar.
Yeah, and there's actually been a longer list of athletes who have had success in multiple sports at the college level and professional level. I mean, Will Yateman is another one who I played kind of with and against at the college level. He was at Maryland and Notre Dame playing lacrosse only at Maryland, then lacrosse and football at Notre Dame. Then he played for the Pats under Bill Belichick. You mentioned Chris Hogan doing the same. I believe the quarterback for Wisconsin was a top college lacrosse recruit, and he decided to shift last minute over and play college football. And then we have Pat Spencer, to your point, exhausted 4 years of eligibility lacrosse, Tour-a-thon winner, so our Heisman essentially, and then now is more than holding his own. I think he's one of the more dominant players in Big Ten basketball right now. Almost had a double-double in their attempt to upset Maryland last week. So I was surprised by it. I mean, we drafted him. He's taken, and his rights are with Archers Lacrosse Club in the PLL. Tremendous player. I knew he was a great basketball player, but I think it speaks to what you had referenced and what I always talk about. So there's a bunch of crossover skills in lacrosse to basketball and football. But I think what goes often under discussed in pro sports, or call it in Pat's case, a fifth year of eligibility, is that, pro sports are really a combination of an athlete's commitment to improving. And that sounds really fundamental, but a lot of people lose sight of what to do once you get drafted to pro sports, and they put most of, if not all, their emphasis on the road to getting drafted. But you actually enter into a place where there's a ton of independence, and there's no more hand-holding like there is in college and high school sports and even youth sports. So you see a lot of athletes emerge from lower profile universities in all of the major sports leagues because they take it upon themselves to excel. The other thing is, college graduates are 21 and 22 years old. Your accelerated moments of growth are into your mid and late 20s. So, peak performing years for a long time have been considered 28 to 32, because 28, you're still at the height of your athleticism, and you're starting to pick up the nuance of psychology and sport and experience and reps. So Pat Spencer right now, is a fifth year player taking on, a sport that he loved, was his first love, different than lacrosse. And I think he's got a really strong perspective that a lot of younger undergrads don't have. So I'm excited to see him continue to play this season. We'll see what happens at the next level, whether he's going to get a look from the NBA or the G League, or ideally come back to the PLL.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch, and it'll be fun to follow, like you said. Last question, Paul. I wanted to give you an opportunity to shout out some of maybe the dates coming up on the schedule as you guys look to promote the season coming up. What's coming or what lies ahead for the PLL? What should we be looking out for?
Yeah, so one of the things that we had talked about early and often was our social media. So you can follow us on Instagram at PLL or our Twitter at Premier Lacrosse. We push out, the lion's share, if not everything, through our social. Our website is premierlacrosseleague.com. We announced our expansion team. We have our expansion draft coming up at NBC Studios second week of February. And then we'll have our college draft in April on NBC Sports with a really talented senior class led by a lot of Big Ten players. So that's going to be exciting to see. Our training camp is also in May, and then our first game weekends at Gillette Stadium on May 29th and 30th. So there's a Friday night game, 2 Saturday night games. And so, what's advantageous again about the tour-based model that we've adopted is that every game weekend, fans get access to 3 games in that stadium over 2 days. So we're going to continue to make announcements over the next 4 to 5 weeks, and we'll have our 15-week schedule ironed out. Thus far, we made Gillette, as I had mentioned, and then we have Atlanta the following week, and we just announced Long Island this week. So more to come, but thanks for having me on, and I think the sport is really accelerating right now.
Awesome, yeah, and Big Ten lacrosse feeds nicely into the PLL just with how the schedule shakes out. So be sure to follow the Big Ten, follow Premier Lacrosse League, and follow Paul Rabil because he's doing big things. Paul, thanks again, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks once again to Paul for joining me. Really impressive dude. Awesome to get to know him a little bit and hear his story and his ventures and really kind of learn a little bit more about a sport that is becoming much more competitive, or already is very competitive, as Paul said, in the Big Ten, making the Big Ten more competitive nationally, as Paul alluded to with some of our elite teams that we now have in the Big Ten Conference. So exciting stuff there. And definitely follow his progression through the Premier Lacrosse League as he continues to build that. All right, we will now toss it over to some basketball talk with our BTN researcher, Harold Shelton. Harold was on vacation last week, so he's back. Has some catching up to do, which we do in the next 15-20 minutes or so. And we will not waste any more time and get right to him. It's the Take 10 podcast interview with Harold Shelton. Starts right now. All right, I'm very pleased to be joined by Harold Shelton. He's back from Mexico, back from vacation. Harold, I got you a gift while you were back. What do you think here, man?
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm definitely enjoying the new digs. Got some new mics and a rug and nice table. Got some shelves. It's coming along quite nicely.
Yeah, so we're talking about our podcast studio, digital studio setup. We got some furniture, like H said. We finally got some new and improved microphones. So it feels kind of like a little fan cave, a little professional recording studio, and it's a good place to talk sports. So glad we're up to speed now.
Yeah, exactly. We obviously made do before, but having these upgrades is definitely a good thing.
We must be doing something right if they're willing to set this up for us.
Exactly.
So let's get into it. Let's talk Big Ten hoops. Let's catch up since you've been gone. There's been some movement, especially near the top of the conference, especially with a couple teams that have been near the opposite end of the conference the last few years, and with Rutgers especially, mostly since they've entered the league. So back from the beach, what are your thoughts on the movements toward top of the league that Illinois and Rutgers have made the past couple weeks?
The Illinois one isn't too unexpected. I know they were one of the teams preseason where they were picked kind of all over the map. I know some people had them as high as second, some others had them as low as 8th or 9th, but a lot of people thought they had the talent to kind of do this. Now, granted, the way that they played a year ago is not at all how they play now, especially defensively. With having Kofi on the floor, they can't do the 40 minutes of hell, full court press, trap everything. They've just become a much more solid defensive team, a better rim protecting team. They don't foul nearly as much, and I think all of that has kind of gone into why Illinois has been so much better. Trent Frazier and Ayo Dosunmu making shots late in the game certainly helps as well. As for Rutgers, though, that's clearly a huge surprise. We saw them, late November, early December. They lose a tough game to St. Bonaventure on a neutral court. Lose at Pitt, who was just okay. And you're like, same kind of thing. I know Michigan State wound up beating them in the first conference game of the season. I think it was Bowl Selection Sunday. Didn't look so great doing it. It was right after the Duke loss, and I'm kind of like, I don't know. Maybe this Michigan State team isn't that good. And then you see what Rutgers has done since that point, and now you're like, whoa, they got a top 20 win in the net. And, the fact that Rutgers is playing so well, defensively coming into the Iowa game, they were the second most efficient team since the start of conference play in the country, like behind Kansas. So that just goes to show you how well Rutgers was playing.
Yeah, you touched on it there. I thought Rutgers was still a year away. I thought the NIT would be a good accomplishment this year for where they were at, kind of in their build under Steve Peichel. But like you said, they just picked up their level of play in the last month or so. It's been really impressive to watch. When Geo Baker went down, I was thinking, man, this is like really unfortunate timing because it looked like they were really starting to make a leap. And instead, they used it almost as fuel. They didn't really drop off at all. And conversely, when he's come back, they haven't dropped off either. I know they lost to Iowa, but there's nothing to hang your head about out of that result. It was still a great game. So they've been able to withstand some fluctuations in the lineup. Ron Harper Jr. seems to be getting better and better. He had his career high against Iowa. He looks like he's going to be a force for as long as he chooses to stay in college. And it just continues to be a great story. I know this is something we've seen in football and basketball this year, but them entering the top 25 in basketball after a long drought, just like Indiana did in football after a multi-decade drought. So it's cool to see. I think it's it speaks to kind of how the Big Ten across the board has upgraded their coaching and facility budgets in the last 5-10 years since the network was around. I hate to pat ourselves on the back too much, but I think there's a connection there, and we're seeing teams that usually might not be regular players in the top 25 or in the Big Ten race start to enter into it. So that's been good. I agree with what you said about Illinois, how people maybe didn't expect them to be a top 2 or 3 Big Ten team, but we're going to be in the mix. It's good, as an alum to see them finally figure it out, because it was looking kind of dicey about a month ago after they had lost to Missouri. But they're figuring things out in a big way. And then you mentioned Iowa briefly. They've got scary potential to me because Luka Garza has elevated his play to a level I'm not sure we've seen. I I can't think of a comparison off the top of my head. You've got more of a reservoir to go off of. So what do you think about him and how he compares and stacks up in recent Big Ten history?
Yeah, so what he's doing is pretty rare. Obviously, another big game last night, with 28 points, 13 rebounds against Rutgers. And the fact that Iowa was able to win that game despite the fact that he didn't even score in the final 11 minutes just goes to show you how explosive Iowa can be. The fact that he's already had 4 25 and 10 games, it's the second most, or tied for the second most of any Big Ten player the last 10 years. Only Biggie Swanigan had more in a single season. Now he's averaging like 23 points and 10 rebounds on the year. In terms of power conference players to do that since 92, 93, you're talking Big Dog, you're talking KD,
Blake Griffin,
Beasley, you're talking Blake Griffin, Luke Herringody. Like, he's in elite company, for 20 plus years. The fact that he's doing this, and he's doing it in a league that has a ton of really good big men. I mean, the fact that Luka Garza has shown the progression that he has is very impressive.
Sure, and Iowa's another team that I thought was maybe a year away from getting back to the tournament when they lost Bohannon, when they had a couple early stumbles. Like, DePaul came in and beat them on their home floor. McCaffrey was ruled out, and there's just been a lot of uncertainty with them, and Garza's more than made up for kind of all of that. It's been incredible to see. And, when we talk about elite big men, Daniel Oturu is another guy who's put up numbers that we haven't really seen consistently in the Big Ten. I mean, you got guys like Kaminsky that put up ridiculous numbers as big men, and guys like him. You mentioned outside the conference with Herringody and guys like that. But what Oturu is doing is just as impressive. And if he wasn't doing it in the same year as Luka Garza, he'd be talked about as the Big Ten Player of the Year, and still maybe could grab that title. So, it could be recency bias, but I don't remember multiple guys ever doing this kind of at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, this is really rare. The fact that Luka, is in rarefied air by himself. Now you add another guy who's averaging 20 and 10. I mean, Oturu and Garza, in terms of power conference players, they're accounting. Well, I think Garza's accounting for 29% of the team's points. Oturu's accounting for 28% of Minnesota's points. Only Marcus Howard has a higher percentage of scoring the team's points amongst power conference players. The fact that he's also a 20 and 10 guy. I mean, the fact that you have two of them going at the same time is pretty crazy. I know going into the Wednesday night games, Garza was 6th in the country in scoring. Oturu was 6th in the country in rebounding. The fact that you're just seeing this at the same time is really rare. I mean, the fact that Oturu, I saw on a mock draft the other day, he was 8th.
Right.
He was 8th overall, and then people saw him be good last year, and I think people thought he would take a jump, but I don't think anybody saw him as a potential top 10 pick as a sophomore. It just kind of goes to show how good he's really been. And you're talking about, Chris Humphreys, Big Dog, Eschmeyer, Garza, and Oturu, guys that average 20 and 10 in the Big Ten in the last 25 plus years. Yeah,
super impressive. So, I think Iowa, Illinois, Rutgers, Michigan State have earned exactly where they are right now in that top kind of 4. Some teams have fluctuated outside of that. Maryland's another team that has been interesting. They finally got a road win, albeit at Northwestern. And another team with a ton of talent that, I've always kind of rooted for to finally break through because it seems like they always are so close, and we talk about them a lot. It's Penn State. They were looking a little shaky a few weeks ago, the last couple of weeks, but they stabilized, taking advantage of a couple teams that actually have started to slide in Ohio State and Michigan. So back-to-back wins for Penn State. I think they're on a trajectory where they're going to break through this year and make the tournament. Any trends that stand out to you when looking at the Nittany Lions? Do you think that Stevens and his whole cast are playing at a high enough level to carry them there?
Well, for one, Lamar Stevens is a dude.
Right.
I mean, just period. And he's been a dude for a while.
Another guy getting kind of overshadowed by this greatness that we're seeing in other teams.
I mean, if you take any one of these players that we've talked about, whether it's Oturu, Garza, and Stevens, and just split them up into different years, they'd be the absolute favorite for Big Ten Player of the Year. But they're all doing it in the same year. And Stevens has been doing this for a while. It's just that, he's had Tony Carr on the team, or, he's had, other players who have kind of taken the spotlight. But now it's his team, And the supporting cast is certainly starting to help. I mean, Mike Watkins is a known commodity, but now you got the Joneses, and we saw what they did against Michigan. You know, it was Myron Jones who had a huge first half, and Curtis Jones had, 18 points in the second half on the road to win in Ann Arbor. So if they're getting performances like that, I think that they'll wind up making the tournament. What's killed them in the past is that they've lost non-conference games against teams that aren't so good, and that's come back to bite them. And they didn't have that. The only questionable loss non-conference was the 20-point lead that they blew against Ole Miss on a neutral court. But that's not a resume killer. And, in fact, they have 5 quad one wins in the net, and only Iowa, Seton Hall, and Kansas have more nationally. So it just goes to show you how good of a position Penn State is.
Yeah, you brought up the almighty net. It's that time of year where we're starting to see the graphics now across all networks and breaking down who's got the most quad one wins in the net, what your quad 1, 2, 3, 4 record is. The rankings came out a couple weeks ago, the original ones, I believe. But I saw a few in the past week or so that, put 11 or 12 Big Ten teams in the top 40 of the net and had 3 Big Ten teams among the top 5 or 6 schools that had the most quad one wins. So, for those who are new or just kind of tuning in or not sure what the net is, saw some confusion yesterday when we posted a graphic about it among the social media masses. Let's just do a quick refresher course, Net 101, and explain how it's kind of weighted, home versus road, and why it's so important and why the committee uses it.
So the net pretty much just took over for the RPI as the NCAA's main evaluation metric. It's weighted to the point now where road wins mean more. RPI was just kind of all wins were the same for the most part. So now you break it down by the quad system. So, for instance, a quad one win, if you beat a team in the top 30 at home, that counts as a quad one win. If you beat a team in the top 50 on a neutral court, it counts as a quad one. If you beat a top 75 team on the road, it counts as a quad one. Before, with the RPI, everything was just top 50. Nothing, no differential at all. But obviously it's much harder to win on the road, as we've seen with the Big Ten this season.
Right.
And so those road wins mean much more, and the NCAA committee is taking a better look at that.
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago I asked you, when looking at the Big Ten standings, we looked at kind of the jumbled mess in the middle, and that's going to kind of stay that way the whole year with just how deep the conference is. But I asked you to pick out a team or two from the masses that would rise up maybe in emerge and maybe threaten for the Big Ten title. Looks like right now it's been, as we talked about, Illinois, Iowa, and Rutgers who have emerged at this point in the year. The team you said that might have a pretty high ceiling, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Purdue. They are in the...
I actually said Wisconsin was going to be the most interesting.
Okay. Wisconsin's most interesting. They're holding firm to that. I mean, they are intriguing still, and they still are going to make some noise. I think Potter's stabilized them. But I ruined my own segue because I was going to get into the teams that are now sliding.
Yeah.
With Purdue, Michigan, Ohio State. Do you have any grave concern over any of these teams potentially, playing their way out of the NCAA tournament conversation? I don't think Wisconsin falls into that. They've been playing pretty well overall. Those 3 teams I mentioned that, at one point, especially Michigan and Ohio State, look to be surefire locks. What are your concerns as we, play the last week of January out here?
Ohio State certainly isn't playing well right now, but I think they built up such a cushion early on that they'd have to completely, just fall on their face to miss the tournament at this point. Purdue, I thought, was always kind of teetering. They missed opportunities early. They had a chance to beat Texas at home, who we found out isn't that great.
Right.
So that would have been a nice, quad 2-ish win that they could have had and didn't get. They had Florida State on the ropes in a tournament in Florida. Obviously, Florida State's the top 5 team in the country according to the AP polls. A game they lost in overtime.
That win might get Indiana in the tournament.
Yeah, exactly. So that would have been a nice one for Purdue. You thought that if they could just do enough in Mackey, that they can, get enough quad 1 and 2 wins to kind of bolster their tournament resume. And, we saw Michigan State go there, and Purdue played their best game of the season and completely blow them out of the gym, but they didn't follow that up. Once Illinois came in, Illinois kind of took it to them. And so even though they have good, metrics right now, and they're only 10-9 on the year, like that's a team that has trouble scoring. Aaron Wheeler's, has not been able to find his shot. They're a complete mess on the road. Their home and road splits are completely crazy. I think of the teams you mentioned, they're the one that's in the most trouble. Michigan needs Isaiah Livers back and fast. But even with him coming back, I think the issues on defense and their issues with turnovers, I don't know if Livers just solves all of that. I mean, Michigan's got the worst defensive efficiency in conference play.
Saw that.
Which is
unheard of considering, obviously a completely different staff, but with Yaklich last year, had them at the top.
I mean, they were top 10 nationally defensively pretty much every year he was there. And the fact that they're the worst, defensive efficiency team in the Big Ten in conference play is alarming.
Is there any word on when they expect Livers back?
I know he's, kind of participated in warm-ups against Penn State. He did so against Iowa as well. But, with the groin, it's kind of hard to say. I definitely don't think it's one of those things you want to rush him back. But they clearly need him. They definitely need his shooting and his floor spacing because I don't know if Xavier Simpson taking 23 shots is the answer.
All right, so before we wrap up, big game tonight between Indiana and Michigan State. Michigan State got swept last year by Indiana. This is going to date us because this is going to come out Friday at the earliest. But it's interesting with our, our schools potentially heading toward a showdown second week of February. It might be a 1 versus 2 situation, might be a tied for Big Ten lead situation at that point. How do you see Michigan State kind of holding serve at the top? You think they'll drop a few the rest of the way? I feel like a lot of people have been predicting the Big Ten champ having 5, 6, maybe even 7 losses.
Yeah, I would be really surprised if the champ had less than 5. I think that, this week is kind of a big week, and Tom Izzo kind of commented on that in terms of a separation type of week. Michigan State's got 2 road games, Indiana and Minnesota both this week. The fact that, they've only played 2 road games thus far, of their 7, kind of goes to show that, and one of those road games being Northwestern, they had a top-heavy home schedule, and I think that allowed them to get off to a good start, and everybody felt really great about them. The Purdue game happened. They haven't been on the road since. I'd say they split these 2 games this week, which means, Illinois, if they take care of business in Ann Arbor, they could be in first place by the time we talk next week.
All right. Looking forward to it. Let's wrap it up there. We gave our new toys a quick test drive. So far, so good. And we'll see you back in the saddle next week, my friend.
Sounds good, man.
All right. All right. Thanks one more time to Harold and Paul for joining the show. Really good variety of topics today. Obviously touching on a new sport for us on the Take 10 podcast. Learned some ins and outs of lacrosse and what it takes to launch a new league. Obviously very complex, but Paul seems up to the task. So good luck to him. And we'll continue our rhythm of getting Harold on pretty much weekly here on the show to catch up in Big Ten basketball. Exciting stuff ahead. We will continue to get a good variety of guests on, so we hope you continue to listen. Till then, we will talk to you next time. Actually, before I sign off, can't forget to thank Julie Bronder and Wes White for helping produce the show. Always got to show them love for producing the show, especially on days like today when I am getting it in at the very last second and they're trying to go home. So shout out to them. And once again, thank you to everyone for listening. We'll talk to you soon here on the Take 10 podcast.